Imagine a country slowly sinking under an invisible weight. Not war. Not disaster. Something far more silent. Something growing every second. That weight is debt. Trillions of dollars owed to unseen hands. Numbers so large they stop making sense. Stacked obligations, layer over layer. Each one demanding to be paid. Each one growing quietly. Every second, interest keeps ticking. It never pauses. It never sleeps. It keeps growing, even when the country does not. Time itself becomes the enemy. You would expect panic. You would expect cuts. You would expect repayment. But that's not what happens. Instead, something surprising begins. The country borrows more money. Not less. More. As if the solution to debt is even more debt. A loop begins forming. Again, it borrows. And again. The cycle repeats without hesitation. Each step feels necessary. Each step makes the problem bigger. This is not one country. It's not a rare mistake. It's happening everywhere. Across continents. Across economies. The largest economies on Earth are all doing the same thing. Borrowing more than they can repay. Expanding debt beyond imagination. Quietly, collectively. And the strangest part? The system still works. Markets continue. People continue. Life goes on as if nothing is wrong. So here's the question. If debt is dangerous, why do governments keep increasing it? And what happens if they stop? Let's start with a number. Not a small one. Not even something you can easily imagine. This number defines the modern financial world. And it's growing faster than ever. Global debt has crossed $300 trillion. That's not a typo. That's not exaggerated. It's real. And it's happening right now. To understand how big that is, we need perspective. Because numbers like this lose meaning. They become abstract. Almost unreal. But they aren't. Imagine earning 1 Indian rupee lakh a year. A stable income. Enough to live. Enough to survive. Now imagine something changes. Suddenly, you owe 3 Indian rupees lakh. Not for luxury. Not for investment. Just existing has put you in debt. That's the situation many countries are in. Logic says, you should stop spending. Cut expenses. Try to repay. Stabilize your situation. That's what any person would do. But governments don't work like individuals. They play by different rules. Different pressures. Different consequences. Instead of reducing debt, they increase it. Instead of slowing down, they accelerate. The system pushes them forward. Not backward. This feels wrong. It feels dangerous. And yet, it's considered normal. Accepted. Even necessary. To understand why, we need to go back. Back to a time when debt was not this powerful. When the system looked very different. The story begins after a massive global crisis. A war that reshaped the world. Economies were shattered. Cities were destroyed. Nations were desperate to rebuild. Governments faced a huge problem. They needed money. A lot of it. More than they had ever needed before. And they needed it fast. Raising taxes wasn't enough. Economies were weak. People had little to give. Pushing harder could break the system completely. So governments turned to borrowing. On a scale never seen before. They took loans to rebuild roads, cities, and industries. And it worked. Economies began to grow again. Jobs returned. Production increased. Confidence slowly came back. Debt seemed like a solution. For decades, this model continued. Borrow, invest, grow. Borrow, invest, grow. A cycle that appeared stable. Even safe. Debt was no longer feared. It became a tool. A way to accelerate development. A way to build the future faster. And as long as economies kept growing, the system held together. Growth made debt manageable. Predictable. Contained. But there was a hidden assumption. Growth would never stop. Economies would keep expanding forever. That belief changed everything. Because if growth slows, the entire system begins to strain. And that's exactly what started happening. Slowly, then suddenly. To understand this system, we need to simplify it. Strip away the complexity. Forget the jargon. At its core, it's actually very simple. Governments need money. And there are only 2 ways to get it. 1, they collect taxes. 2, they borrow. That's it. Everything else builds on this. Taxes are limited. Increase them too much, and people feel the pressure. Businesses slow down. Spending drops. Growth begins to shrink. So governments avoid pushing taxes too far. Because the economy depends on activity, on movement, on people spending and investing. That leaves borrowing. The easier option. The faster option. The less visible option. And the one most governments choose. But how do governments actually borrow? They don't walk into a bank. They don't ask for a personal loan. They use a system built just for them. It's called a bond. A simple idea. You lend money to the government. And they promise to pay you back later. But there's an incentive. They don't just return your money. They add interest. A reward for trusting them. A reason to participate. And because governments are seen as stable, people trust them. Banks trust them. Even other countries trust them. That trust fuels the system. Money flows in. Governments get what they need. Projects continue. Economies keep moving. And everything seems under control. At first, everything looks stable. Money comes in. Projects move forward. Growth continues. Confidence stays high. Nothing seems broken. But there's something happening in the background. Something quiet. Something easy to ignore. The debt doesn't disappear. It waits. Every bond has a deadline. A point where it must be repaid. Principal, plus interest. No exceptions. No delays forever. So what happens when that time arrives? Does the government repay everything? Does it clear the debt completely? Not quite. Instead of paying it off, they do something unexpected. Something that keeps the system alive. They borrow again. New debt is used to repay old debt. Fresh money replaces old obligations. The cycle resets. But the total grows larger. It's like using one credit card to pay another. It works in the short term. It buys time. But it doesn't solve the problem. And over time, this becomes normal. Expected. Built into the system. Debt is no longer something to eliminate. It's something to manage. Governments roll over debt again and again. Year after year. Decade after decade. The cycle never truly ends. And with every cycle, the total debt increases. Slowly at first. Then faster. Until it becomes something much bigger than expected. At this point, the system should collapse. Debt is rising. Repayments are delayed. The cycle keeps expanding. But somehow, it doesn't break. Because there's another player in the system. A powerful one. Often invisible to the public. Quiet, but extremely influential. Central banks. Institutions that control the flow of money. They don't just observe the system. They shape it. They stabilize it. And when governments need help, central banks step in. Not with advice. Not with warnings. But with something far more powerful. They create money. Not by printing paper, but digitally. Numbers appear. Balances increase. Money is injected into the system. This newly created money is used to buy government bonds. The same bonds used to fund debt. The same cycle, now powered artificially. It sounds complex. But the idea is simple. When there isn't enough money, the system creates more. Instantly. Effortlessly. This keeps interest rates low. It keeps borrowing cheap. It keeps government spending. And it keeps the system alive. But there's a hidden cost. A cost that doesn't appear immediately. A cost that builds slowly, across the entire economy. Because when money is created this easily, its value begins to change. And that's where the real consequences begin. For years, the system kept running. Debt was rising. Money was flowing. Confidence stayed intact. Everything looked stable on the surface. But beneath that calm surface, cracks were forming. Risks were building. Hidden weaknesses were spreading silently. Few people noticed. In 2008, everything changed. A collapse began. Not slowly. Not quietly. But all at once. Banks started failing. Institutions once considered untouchable suddenly disappeared. Confidence turned into panic. Fear spread everywhere. Markets crashed. Trillions were wiped out. Wealth vanished in days. What took decades to build, collapsed in moments. People lost jobs. Businesses shut down. Entire economies slowed to a halt. The system was on the edge. Governments faced a decision. Let the system fail, or step in and save it. There was no easy option. No perfect solution. They chose to intervene. Massive bailouts were announced. Trillions of dollars were deployed. The system was rescued, at a cost. Central banks lowered interest rates. Almost to zero. Borrowing became cheaper than ever before. Money flooded the system. The crisis was contained. Stability slowly returned. But something had changed forever. The system had crossed a line. Just as the system began to recover, another shock arrived. Unexpected. Unpredictable. Global. Everything changed overnight. In 2020, the world came to a halt. Businesses shut down. Travel stopped. Economies froze in place. Millions of people lost their income. Families struggled to survive. Uncertainty spread faster than any crisis before. Governments had no time to think long-term. They had to act immediately. The priority was survival. At any cost. Once again, they turned to the same solution. Borrow more. Spend more. Inject money into the system. Stimulus checks were sent. Businesses were supported. Entire industries were kept alive artificially. Central banks accelerated money creation. Faster than ever before. Trillions entered the system within months. Debt didn't just increase. It exploded. Numbers rose at a pace never seen in history. The scale became unimaginable. But in that moment, it worked. The system didn't collapse. People survived. Markets recovered. Stability returned again. And that's when the realization hit. The system now depended on this. On debt. On constant support. On endless borrowing. Something fundamental had changed. Not suddenly, but permanently. The system was no longer the same. It had evolved into something else. Debt was no longer just a tool. It was no longer optional. It had become essential. A core part of survival. Without borrowing, the system slows. Growth weakens. Activity declines. Everything begins to contract. Without borrowing, markets react instantly. Prices fall. Confidence disappears. Panic starts building again. Without borrowing, jobs are lost. Businesses close. Economies shrink. The impact spreads everywhere. So governments don't have a real choice. They can't simply stop. They can't pause. They have to continue. The system demands it. The structure requires it. The economy depends on it. Debt keeps everything moving. But the more it continues, the bigger it becomes. The heavier it gets. The harder it is to control. And slowly, a new reality forms. One where stopping is more dangerous than continuing. Even if continuing makes it worse. That's the trap. The system is no longer managing debt. It's surviving because of it. And that changes everything. At first, the effects are hard to notice. Nothing dramatic. Nothing sudden. Just small changes. Almost invisible. Prices begin to rise. Slowly. Quietly. Everyday things cost a little more than before. You feel it, but can't fully explain it. Your salary stays the same. Your income doesn't change. But your expenses keep growing. The gap starts to widen. This is inflation. Not loud. Not obvious. But constant. Quietly reducing your purchasing power over time. The money you saved yesterday buys less today. And it will buy even less tomorrow. Without you doing anything wrong. But here's where it gets worse. Not everyone is affected equally. The system distributes impact unevenly. Some benefit more than others. New money enters the system at the top. Through banks. Through corporations. Through financial markets. Not directly to you. Asset prices rise. Stocks go up. Real estate becomes expensive. Wealth grows, but only for those who already own assets. Meanwhile, everyday life becomes harder. Rent increases. Food costs rise. Savings lose value. Pressure builds silently. And just like that, the gap widens. Between those who own assets and those who rely on income. A divide that keeps growing. At this point, the system looks stable. Markets are functioning. Governments are operating. Life continues as usual. But beneath the surface, it's fragile. Because high debt comes with a condition. It depends on low interest rates. It depends on cheap borrowing. It depends on control. But interest rates don't stay low forever. They rise. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes suddenly. And when they do, everything changes. Higher rates mean higher payments. Governments now owe more, just to maintain existing debt. The cost multiplies quickly. Budgets start to strain. More money goes into interest. Less goes into development. Less into public services. One wrong move, and pressure builds fast. Markets react instantly. Confidence begins to weaken. The system feels unstable again. This is what makes high-debt economies fragile. They rely on balance, on timing, on conditions staying favorable. And if that balance breaks, the consequences are immediate, severe, hard to control. History has shown this before. But the risk doesn't stop here. There's another layer. A quieter one. One that builds over time, without immediate reaction. The burden shifts forward. Into the future. Onto people who didn't create this system, but will have to live with it. At this point, the system faces a difficult truth. There is no easy solution. No simple fix. Every option comes with a cost. Raising taxes slows the economy. Cutting spending reduces growth. Both choices create pressure. Both choices have consequences. Stopping borrowing sounds logical, responsible, necessary. But in reality, it triggers something far worse. Markets react immediately. Confidence collapses. Activity slows down. The system begins to freeze. Jobs disappear. Businesses struggle. Growth stops. What seemed like a solution becomes a crisis. So governments continue. Not because they want to, but because they have to. Because stopping is not an option. The system survives on belief. On trust. On the assumption that it will keep working. That confidence holds everything together. As long as people believe, the system continues. Markets move. Economies grow. Stability remains, on the surface. But if that belief breaks, even for a moment, everything changes. The system doesn't bend. It cracks. So here's the question. If the world depends on endless debt, what happens when it finally reaches its limit?